Grand Dawning, Great Rising. Welcome to another edition of 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490. 360 Info Network is sponsored by the Cleveland Observer, where their motto is to inspire, to eliminate, and to inform. Welcome to another edition. We're glad to have you, and we have a great show planned for you today and a few announcements that we will make. But before we do that, I'd like to welcome to 360 Info Network the founder and the creator of this program, Brother Hamtonio. Hamtonio?
Greetings, everyone. We welcome you to this show, to this platform, again, to go on this journey with us as we experience new horizons, and so we can take you to a place, to a journey that we feel that is necessary for African American people in this country and across the globe as well. So we welcome you. We got a great show for you today. So stay tuned and stay plugged in and stay beautiful.
All right. 6 degrees here in Cleveland. I don't know what it's like out in California, but it's a little chilly here, and we're sitting on pins and needles anticipating a blizzard that's supposed to arrive later on today. But before the blizzard gets here, we're going to do a meditation workshop, a comedic meditation workshop at Larchmere Arts today. We have Brother Tahuti Kamo coming in from Philadelphia. He's already here. You can get a comedic astrology reading today. If you come by Larchmere Arts, we'll be there from 4 to 7 p.m. So you're definitely welcome to come by. There is an admission charge, but what you get for $15 will be well worth it. So we're really happy about that. Today on 360 Info Network, we have a guest that was brought to us a few years ago by Brother Hamtonio. His name is Manu Ampim. He's a professor at Contra Costa College there in San Pablo, California. And I know he's not as cold as we are, but he said it's been a little bit chilly lately. So welcome to the show. Welcome to 360 once again. Today, we are going to talk about African Heritage Month. How are you today, Professor?
Brother Vince and Brother Antonio, I'm great. I'm holding down the fort here on the West Coast. A little bit chilly, but not like the East Coast type of chilly. But I'm here to warm it up this morning.
Okay. Well, we're glad to have you back again. Go ahead, Antonio.
No, I just said I'm just agreeing with him. I said right on. That's good.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So a year ago, we had a conversation about African Heritage Month, and we also had with us Dr. Craig Woodson, who is the president of the local chapter of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was the fact that before it was ASALH, it was the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, and there were themes that came out every year as a result of what they wanted to express for that year. And those themes most often, if not always, had something to do with Africa. And then Dr. Woodson transitioned and things kind of changed. And so when we looked at today, we don't see themes that are African centered. We see themes that have to do with Black people in America. Professor Ampim has notified us of this, and he has a very strong case for changing the month from Black History Month to African Heritage Month. And I got to put this in here just so that people have some context. Back in the day, we were observing Negro History Month or Negro History Week. It was Negro History Week. And then some students at Kent State University had a conversation with one of the administrators and one of the professors there. And one of the students in the room talking about the observance of Negro History Week said, why don't we take the whole damn month? And as a result of that conversation, Kent State University's president decided to allow a month-long celebration of Black History Month. And then later on, President Ford decided to make it an official holiday or an official observance for the entire country because he was interested in getting Black votes. Obviously, it didn't work, but we have Black History Month in America. But now has come the time to change that perhaps to African Heritage Month. So, Professor, I want to give you an opportunity to make the case African Heritage Month, not just in America, but around the world.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate that, my brother. As you indicated, so started as a week back in February of 1926. And on the 50th anniversary of the celebration of Black greatness and contributions to the U.S. and the world, it became a month. The founder, the man who's the reason for the season, the great Carter G. Woodson, had always envisioned an entire year. But in 1976, it became Black History Month. And now people refer to it as that. Sometimes they may say African American, but that's not the full vision of Dr. Woodson. If anybody reads his work, his advocacy as a great thinker, historian, educator, and leader, Woodson not only envisioned an entire year, but Woodson went much further. He embraced Africa throughout his entire academic career, and increasingly so. So he wrote more than a dozen books, but if you look at the last books he wrote, like the African background, and for example, why is that not promoted? In fact, his last three articles, not only his last book, but his last three articles, it was an article series that he simply called Egypt, because he was more and more focusing on Africa. And there's no time in his academic career, whether it's the books he wrote or him editing the journal of what was then called the Journal of Negro History, which was an important scholarly publication from the very first issue. From the very first issue of the journal in 1915, there was a focus on Africa, not exclusively, but Africa was front and center with the journal. And then in 1937, the issuing of what was then called the Negro History Bulletin, that was geared towards teachers. So that Woodson was very broad in his thinking, that if you didn't go to an academic environment, then he could catch you in the school. If you weren't in the school, there was a home a correspondence course where Woodson kept the standards high. And there's no aspect of his work or research from the very root and beginning that he's not focusing on African civilizations. And so Woodson has been misrepresented by even those who claim to be representing Woodson, even in the organization, quite frankly, because Woodson made sure that the themes of Asala were focused on Africa, not every year, but it was always central to the national themes and very central to the very first issue of the bulletin and the very first issue of the journal. So there's no reasonable position, scholarly position that could be taken that would effectively separate Woodson from African civilizations. It is there, and he continues to build on that work. And so his book, The Negro in Our History, was a key textbook to deal with Black contributions to humanity, and that's what he was focused on. And the more he focused on contributions, naturally, that drew Woodson more and more towards the unique and important African achievements, African accomplishments, and African contributions to the world. He was not focused on what someone did against us and what someone did to us. But Woodson took white supremacy head on in the midst of Jim Crow segregation, racism, and lynching. So those crazy people are saying that they gave us the shortest month of the year. Who is they? Woodson took it. Nobody gave him anything, and then stood up like men do and made one of the greatest contributions in the history of the modern world, where he stood up and he argued and promoted and defended African unique contributions to the world when we were at the apex of human achievement. And all of his scholarship centers around that. He did not omit the Black experience and contributions in the U.S., but no one could limit him during his time. But now that the great scholar has passed away, now people have moved away from his own work. Woodson would be absolutely condemning how so-called Black History Month is portrayed today, because it's a whole bunch of finger popping and giving out a whole bunch of awards and food. And so when they call yours truly, they want to tell me I have 10 minutes to speak and can you come from free for free? Hell no. You spend all that money on entertainment and food and all the other stuff. To disrespect me. I've been in the field helping to promote Woodson's work, been in the field working for decades, and you want me to come for free. So I told you got a big company like Chevron in Richmond. The lady calls me and says that we really respect your work. I saw an article in the local paper promoting your research. So can you come speak? It sounds like a worthy cause. Do you have a budget for an honorarium? No, we don't. Really? Why not? Because it's downplayed. And I can tell you one thing: Woodson would condemn a lot of these different events because it's just a bunch of awards. And he could, and I don't have to speculate. Woodson criticized people in his day, and I guarantee if people read what he wrote in the journal of what was then called Negro History, now is the Journal of African American History, they would be shocked at how he condemned many of these events that were not about the promotion of Black greatness and contributions, but simply, as he said, silver tongue people that don't know very much, but they are, he called them spellbinders, people coming in to speak about nothing. And the events were just about either Black trauma, who got beat up and lynched, or topics that have nothing to do with anything important. So again, no aspect of Woodson's work or scholarship that did not center around Africa, and all of the biographers and biographies on Woodson are shocking in the sense that how can you write a biography and discuss the Black history movement, as it's called, discuss Woodson and leave out the central aspect of his scholarship? So African Heritage Month is a much more accurate way to portray and present the occasion, and it's in line with the vision of Woodson and the work that he was doing until he passed 3/4 of a century ago.
Got to ask a couple of questions. First of all, what do you think was responsible for the disconnect, the shift from, Africa to just the focus on North America or the United States specifically?
That's a great question, and I've thought about this because in my work as a scholar, when I was becoming a scholar, I did my master's thesis at Morgan State University, and I started working on that back in 1987. And one of the things that was very clear for me going to the archives to look at Dr. King, my thesis was on the revolutionary Dr. Martin Luther King, and I was stunned by the amount of evidence and materials that have been taken out of his work. So the biggest file in the Martin Luther King archives was his file on Africa and African liberation movements. But no one would know that unless they were in the archives. And the way I found that out is that David Garrow is a Pulitzer Prize winning author who wrote Bearing the Cross. And when I was working on my thesis on Dr. King, Bearing the Cross had just come out about a year or so earlier. So I used this 800-page book as a general reference. So when I went to the archives, there were certain speeches and writings that I was looking for. David Garrow said this was the biggest file of Dr. King that he kept on Africa. But yet, if you read Bearing the Cross, an 800-page book, you would never get that idea because Garrow omits all of King's support of armed revolutionary movements in Africa, his correspondence with revolutionaries in Kenya and Zimbabwe and South Africa. Why is he writing about that if he can say accurately, that is, that was a big part of King's focus? So I saw King separated from Africa, and now I've seen the same thing with Carter G. Woodson. So you have two of the greatest men in the 20th century that have been separated from Africa after they passed away. So I'm convinced that it's not these great men not embracing Africa, it's the people that are misrepresenting them. And it's very clear that those that misrepresent Dr. Carter G. Woodson, they are uncomfortable with Africa. That's why they separate Woodson from Africa. They've separated Woodson from the very foundation of his thinking, the very foundation of his work. Woodson was able to say what he wanted to say, to write what he wanted to say, because he organized Associated Publishers. And through Associated Publishers, this is the apparatus they use to publish his books and also to publish the Journal of Negro History and the Negro History Bulletin. And Woodson said that teaching teaching the truth is self-defense. So this is why he had his publication. But since the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, they've abandoned Associated Publishers and independent publishing. So now if you want to get the journal, you have to go to the University of Chicago, a mainstream institution that can control what's presented and how it's distributed. Woodson was fundamentally against that. He said that nobody should be allowed to tell you what to say and what to write. That's why he was independent. So to that question about Woodson being separated from Africa, the people themselves would never say that they are of African descent or an African in America. They may say, so they're uncomfortable. And so therefore they have to separate the very man that they're following by bastardizing his legacy and not embracing Africa in the way that Woodson did. So that's what I know now after looking at the grand scheme of things over the decades from King to now Carter G. Woodson and trying my best to make sure that I can liberate his legacy from the clutches that are of people who are very calculating and misrepresenting Woodson's work and his message.
I want to make sure that I heard what you said about Dr. King and the revolutionary movements that were going on the continent of Africa. Again, just so that I'm clear, were you saying that he was supportive of those things, knowing that it was a violent means to address whatever injustice that was taking place? Is that what you said?
Yes, 100%. No one could ever find an essay, an interview, an article, a sermon, a speech, or the FBI archives. You'll never find Dr. King ever making a negative statement about the armed liberation movements in Africa and indicating that they should use another method. He said that we in the West must support these revolutions. He also said that we in the West have to understand that why the newer nations have to go through the same extremism, revolution, and violence that our country, meaning the U.S., went through to be formed. He's referring to the American Revolutionary Movement, which was a bloody 8-year conflict between the 13 American colonies and Britain. And King, if people just looked up one of his popular speeches, Beyond Vietnam, on April 4th, 1967, he said, we in the West must support these revolutions. But he goes on, look at his last book. Where do we go from here? He is specifically saying that these revolutionary movements must be supported. He was a minister. He was concerned about the least of these, or the people he called the barefoot and shirtless people. Why wouldn't he support them? He said that the struggle in Africa and the struggle in the U.S. he said they were the same. Mm-hmm. He said it was that they were both struggling for, quote unquote, against white supremacy and the contempt for life, quote unquote. He said the only difference is that in Africa, the Africans were kicking out the oppressor. He said in America, there's nowhere to kick them out to. So there were differences that these African struggles on the continent were winnable. So he supports them. He publicly begins to support them without hesitation, even with all of the criticism. In the U.S., he was more focused on nonviolence as a strategy to win rights. And he also was a practical man. He said, you just can't go out there irresponsibly talking about we're going to be in an armed standoff with the police. That's one thing, but you got to be willing to look at the bloodbath and make a calculation of what would happen, because he said the government and the right wing, they would not hesitate to use this term to exterminate every black man, woman, and child. So for King in the U.S., he believed it was more of a practical issue that we had to use a nonviolent strategy. Not only that, one other thing, not to go on too long on King, but he said that the debate about arms or weapons is not a debate, because he said nobody has ever disputed whether a man should protect himself and his family if attacked. He said that's been supported since the beginning of mankind. He said the only issue was whether or not it was tactically wise to carry a gun or knife during a demonstration for the right to vote. He said if you did that and you get into a skirmish with the police, the media is going to focus on the skirmish and not what you are there marching for. So Dr. King clearly and consistently said that he said it was a birth of a new age. He said it was a revolutionary age and we need to be on the right side of history. So King became more and more frustrated that he didn't know that nonviolence can work in the US. So that's why he called the Poor People's Campaign that was set for late August 1968 as a, quote, last desperate attempt for nonviolence. After that, he said to the Black Power advocates that he was meeting with in Washington, D.C., he thought these were private meetings. They all did. They weren't private because the FBI has the records in their archives, which yours truly looked at by spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours in the FBI headquarters. And King said, look, with the Poor People's Campaign, we're going to shut down the government. No vehicular traffic, no pedestrian traffic. We're going to tie up the phone lines and shut down the government. And then if they don't give a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged in the billions of dollars, then the next phase would be to dislocate cities all over the country. His goal was to dislocate cities without physically destroying them. In other words, shut down business as usual until the government paid billions in the Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. He said, look, brothers, give us a few months. If this doesn't work, then take over whatever method you think would solve the race problem in America, because I don't have all of the answers. Because this is the last desperate attempt for nonviolence. If it doesn't work, because we're going to get to the goal of freedom, you guys take over whatever method. That was his position. And he cannot and did not and would not ever let anybody put him against the young activists in the Black Power movement. That's why he wrote an article called Black Power Defined to support the movement. And no one can ever find Dr. King in any way talking negative about revolutionary movements in the Mau Mau in Kenya, supported by Dr. King, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Angola, Mozambique, and South Africa, and Zimbabwe, using armed struggle for freedom. And you have a huge file in the archives where Dr. King is calling for their support and networking. And this is why the FBI marked Martin Luther King as the most dangerous Black man in America. Not Malcolm, not anybody else, but Dr. King. Why? They couldn't buy him off, number one. And number two, he had a much larger following. So,
yeah. Well, it's really interesting that you point that out, because one, folks focus on I have a dream and complacency and the prospect of white girls and white boys and Black girls and Black boys being able to join hands and all that good stuff. But I think towards the end of his life, he realized that nonviolence was not the answer. And what you have shared with us really validates that idea. You know, he talked about going into a burning house for salvation, and it just wasn't something that could happen for us. But when you mention all those economic measures that he was talking about, you're talking about billions of dollars that are extremely relevant to the government of this country. And you had an FBI director who thought that Black intellectualism was the greatest threat to the continuance and the perpetuation of pseudo white supremacy. And I call it pseudo white supremacy because white supremacy does not, in fact, exist. But I find that really interesting. And I think it's something that people should know about when they study King, because just like you said, that speech that he did about Vietnam, the speech that he did the night before his life was taken, he knew that his days were numbered. And it was because he was going to have such an impact on the population of this country who were following him despite the objections of those who wanted to keep us in a certain place. We're going to step away for a few moments. When we come back, we're going to welcome Brother Antonio, because I'm sure that he has some observations based on what has been shared. And we will continue our discussion about African Heritage Month right here in the United States of America. And hey, you know, I think the Africans would be excited about that too. You know, our brothers and sisters on the continent, they deserve a month too. But, you know, they don't have to take a month. They can take the whole year. We're going to be back with more 360 Info Network right after this word from our title sponsor. Stay with us.
Cleveland has stories worth telling. and voices that deserve to be heard. That's why the Cleveland Observer is proud to sponsor 360 Info Network with Vince Robinson and Antonio on AM 1490 WERE, where truth, culture, and conversation come together. Each week, host Vince Robinson and Antonio open the door to powerful discussions, from the arts and community history to the issues shaping our neighborhoods today. And the Cleveland Observer is right there with them, shining a light on the people and movements building a stronger Cleveland. Tune in to 360 Info Network and visit cleobserver.com to read, watch, and share more stories that inform, inspire, and unite our community. Because together, we are Cleveland's voice.
Welcome back to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. We are also simulcasting live to YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So you can go to The Journey with Antonio and you can check out 360 Info Network on that platform. You can also go to my YouTube channel and check us out there. Today, we are joined by Professor Manu Ampim. He is a primary researcher and historian. And as you can tell by the conversation that we just had, definitely a historian. Great to know those things about Dr. King that folks really don't know. And, you know, it's really interesting how we even have a King Day. You know, I mean, I think to a certain extent, it was something that was done to placate us. So they gave themselves a day off. You know, some companies, you get optional days off. So they'll give you an extra day and you can either use it for King Day or you can use it for Juneteenth, but they're not celebrating it. They're just saying, okay, well, you can if you choose to, you know, especially since we're operating in this time of pushback on DEI and all those other things. Brother Antonio, you've been listening to our dear brother. What ideas or comments do you have about what has been shared thus far?
Well, again, it's just interesting to see how surgically, you know, these days we are trying to separate, or at least some is trying to separate ourselves from the continent. And it's interesting that, you know, it started way back then. And we don't know what input has been made to cause those particular people to separate, you know, but I don't put nothing past anyone, you know, by separating, because it's to their advantage to separate us from Africa. You see, and you can see this now, and I'm thinking about the membership of Asala and things like that. You have a lot of people who's grounded into this system here that is doctors and, you know, have all kind of degrees. You got some heavy hitters that is a part of Asala, you know, as far as degrees and things of that nature. So you can almost see, in a sense, them separating themselves because they're grounded into this system here and not relating. Because I think that's the psychosis that I think they're affected by, the psychosis that a lot of us is going through, you know, about the media and the aspects and the negativity that they have seen about Africa and visualize, and it's a part of the game that both sides are getting played with, you know, against each other. They're showing us negative things about us over here, I mean, to the Africans over there, and vice versa. So I think they may be subject and victims of that same separation piece. Now, in what my good brother is talking about, putting the word Africa in, just imagine if we had that word Africa in there for this numbers of years, 30, 40 years, you know, how it would play on the psyche of us calling ourselves, because we as a group of people right now, we out of the gate wrong. And what I mean by out of the gate wrong, if you can't identify with who you are, you know, you're out of the gate wrong. You know, that's basic. I don't see no other ethnic group having any issues about what to call themselves and how to identify themselves. So our scholars should have been on point with that and nailing down that piece long time ago. So we won't be still going through what we're going through right now at this particular point, trying to get out the gate in identifying ourselves. That is crazy. That is crazy. So it could be a part of a plan again to keep us, in this state that we're in right now. I believe my good brother Amos Wilson said the best way to immobilize the people is to keep them consumed in their own discord. So we just running around, bumping our heads. Nah, I'm foundational here. I'm this. I'm colored. I'm from Alabama. I'm from Cleveland. You never get anything done. That separation is there, just like our churches. You got churches on each corner. Everybody want to be the boss, and it's fragmented all over the place. And our groups, and that's what the issue is. That's one of the major issues. So I think with that, we're zeroing in on that, and it could have been strategic, could have been a plan. We don't know. Just like we don't know, like with the NAACP, that was started with Jews. We don't know what the backdrop motive of that was, and steering us in a path, in a direction to keep us in the state that we're in right now. But what I can't recall right off the top, I think Brother King went to Ghana. He's traveled to Africa a few times. Yeah, I believe he was in Ghana and things of that nature. Yes. So anything in his memoirs, anything like that talks about his travels at all, and when he visiting the continent?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Well, he said, I've been to the mountaintop.
Mm-hmm.
He said he'd been to the promised land. He said, I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. So
that'll be interesting.
Yeah. Professor, I want to ask you, in light of the fact that you had some conversations with Dr. Woodson, who many may or may not know is a descendant, and I'm speaking of Dr. Craig Woodson, is a descendant of the person who, I don't want to say owned slaves, because that's language that we don't use anymore, but he was the one that held our brothers and sisters hostage on that plantation years ago. I'll put it in those terms. But you had a conversation with him about the failure to observe those African-centered themes. Did that conversation lead to any traction, or are we still where we were a year ago?
It's both, actually. It's led to some traction. So that's positive. It's in the right direction. We're in the same general position, but we're pointed in the right direction. What Dr. Craig Woodson has done is introduce to his family members and others my work, but he recognizes that it's a process, such as, me going to Osceola conference and presenting, and I'm only going to do so much. I'm not begging any damn body for anything. If the receipts are there, they have, as you say, accomplished scholars. They've been trained in the same research methods that I have been trained in. I have some of these biographies on Dr. King. And so when the evidence and the receipt is presented, then you need to move more accurately and correctly to embrace Woodson in the right way. But there's definitely been some progress, because Craig Woodson does have influence. He's, a credible person. He's older, he's genuine in his embracing of Africa, and he opens up a whole nother area of the white branch of the Woodson family, and he agrees. And so there's definitely traction, but there's definitely more work to do. And, quite frankly, I'm in the last, about a year and a half from retiring from Contra Costa College. I've been there for 20 years now. And it's been a great opportunity to influence colleagues, mentor colleagues, and influence tons and tons of students. But I'm really excited about the next phase of my work, where I'm not tied to having to grade all those papers, because I do take my craft seriously, where I can now put more focus, more energy on the national and international stage and platform that I have, because to be able to put together a definitive essay or documentary on Carter G. Woodson would blow 99% of the people away in the country, including scholars who are afraid to embrace Africa, because there's no excuse to overlook, omit, and completely dismiss the fact that he embraced Africa. Why aren't they? For example, some of the listeners who don't know, these are some of the Osceola themes when the great Carter G. Woodson was around. The very first theme. So in 1926, they didn't have apparently they didn't have a theme for a national theme for the first couple of years. But in 1928, the theme was Civilization, a World Achievement. Woodson was not just focused on the U.S. He had a global point of view to make sure that the missing pages, the missing chapters, and the missing volumes of Black and African contributions to the U.S. and the world were put back into the pages. Another theme, Ethiopia meets era in truth. Another national theme. These are all February themes. The Negro achievements in Africa. Another theme, the African background outline. That was also the title of his book. Another theme, American Negro history from the time of importation from Africa to the present day. So that's more on slavery, but nevertheless, Woodson is consistently embracing Africa all the way through. So when I'm able to free up more of my time, I'll be able to focus on. That's one of the things that I'm almost obligated to do because the record is clear. If people can write biographies of about the Black history movement, then I'm obligated to not just write in general about that, but to write what the scholars have, and I'm going to say this, have carefully left out, because there's no way that a scholar could see all of this evidence from the very root of the celebration of Black greatness, not only in the U.S., but in the world, and leave that out as a prominent and central focus of your quote biography on Woodson. This is shameful. It is disrespectful. And there's no way that a scholar could actually come on live and say that it ain't so, that this evidence is not there or it's debatable. The hell if it is. He wrote what he wrote. Woodson wrote so many articles on Black achievements. Like when I'm giving presentations, I show, look at this. He's writing about architecture, about Black architecture and the high level achievements in Egypt and Kush, or what they called Ethiopia at the time. He's constantly writing about that. And not only that, what's really impressive about Carter G. Woodson is that he's able to organize a cadre of other writers. He's the editor of the Journal of Negro History, but you see all of these book reviews dealing with Africa that he made sure was in these issues from the very beginning. Look at the first issue. The very first issue, you see the influence of Woodson. So I look forward to really expanding the stage, and I have every reason to believe that Craig Woodson would be an ally in that because he's already said so. Yes, he said.
Well, it's interesting, this whole notion that we have to ask for permission. We took it upon ourselves to create Kwanzaa. And it's something that's observed here in America, and it's also observed in some places in Africa, believe it or not. So we don't need their permission to commemorate or celebrate or observe African Heritage Month. And I think you've taken that tactic in California, have you not?
Yeah, absolutely. No question whatsoever. We don't ask permission of anybody. And this is the 100 year, this is the centennial year. So this is the year really to take the advocacy and to the next level. That on this 100-year anniversary, we need to shift, as was done with the 50th anniversary, from not just Black History Month to African Heritage Month, because that is very consistent with the work of Woodson. So why would somebody say, well, Professor, what's the difference? Why not just call it Black History Month? And we can include Africa in there. Here's why. Because when it's called Black History Month, people can do anything. I've seen people have events. I saw a flyer where someone had an event. They had a club. So for Black History Month, all of the liquor was discounted. What? And this is a finger popping club with unhealthy, greasy food and liquor, but it's a Black History Month event. There was an event at UC Berkeley here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, a handful of years ago, and someone brought it to my attention on the campus that somebody had the idea of having an event to honor some brother, I don't remember his name, because he was supposedly successful in getting some of the, as you say, the pseudo white supremacists out of the KKK. And since he had success of getting them out of the KKK, somehow this becomes a meaningful Black History Month event. And then it was even posted on the campus website. And when someone sent it to me, I said, oh, hell no. I said, I told the people, I said, you better take this down immediately. We don't support this nonsense. How does this become something that's positive for us? That some guy has success in getting some low life scum out of a vicious organization, and you're going to present this, you're going to peddle this, you're going to insult us? No. Woodson would never agree to that because he didn't agree to it in his day. His criticisms were harsh and uncompromising. Woodson presented the fact that we should always focus on the achievements, the accomplishments, and celebrate these contributions to the world, and not always talk about Black people as a problem. We're not always a problem. Yeah, but the police, you know what? Save that for March 1st. Right now, we're focusing on our humanity. And Carter G. Woodson consistently discussed the humanity of people of African descent. And this is what should be the focus, to assert our humanity, our manhood, our womanhood, and what we gave to the world, and not always associate us with a problem. Because that's what our enemy was doing, Woodson presented. He said that these traducers, they present us as really non-human, or certainly a little less than the average human. And look at them. They deserve to be segregated and lynched. They've never done anything. And every time we talk about them, it's a problem. So people need to understand that they're not embracing Carter G. Woodson when they engage in these outrageous events that he criticized during his day. And they're not embracing Woodson when they're talking about problems. He condemned people for diminishing our humanity by always talking about problems. And he criticized people coming in talking as spellbinders, as he called them. He said the average person knows more than these spellbinders. He said that all these people have going for them is, he said they had strong bellows or strong lungs to talk about.
Hey, Doc, Professor, I got something I want to present here. And, you're making me think about, some of the conversations that some of us have. And because right now I'm thinking about that connection, that lost connection between us and Africa, because you would be surprised about how many people are null and void about what was going on in Africa at the time that we was dealing with slavery here. Some of us think that Africans was just chilling at the beach while slavery was going on with Blacks over here. Now, my question then, because, they tend to focus on all the time about, the Africans assisted in the slave trade, blah, blah, blah. They tend to hold on to that. And I think that's just some false pretenses for keep disconnecting themselves from the imagery that's in your psychosis about Africa. So to keep yourself disconnected from Africa, you focus on something negative, well, this along with the negative images that you've been presented. But do you think that if that particular issue of being knowing that the Africans themselves have been through the same things that we went through over here during slavery, and the same hardships, with the colonization, they're killing the leaders and things, if that was more talked about, do you think that would, maybe bring us together and understanding that this is the same plight, and maybe some could do some critical analysis and understanding that, hey, we've been played against each other because we went through the same thing, and bring us closer together?
Yeah, that's a big thing to really look at, because there's a current war, online social media war between Black folks in the U.S. and Africans on the continent. If folks don't know that, yeah, there's a war. They're back and forth. The Africans don't like us, and then African Americans are this, that, and the other. But I remember when I went to Morgan State University, before I started working on my thesis on King, I actually transferred there in 1984, and out of nowhere, you got a historically Black campus. People all over the place said, the Africans don't like us. I didn't even ask, but who's telling me this? People all around. Because we had Africans from different countries. The Africans don't like us. They were also peddling this at Howard University down the road. But what I noticed is that in my activism, when I actually took inventory of who was working with me, I founded the Progressive Students Action Committee. I work with some of the greatest activists in the country, such as the great Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. He said, if you start your history in slavery, the best you can be is a good slave. But when I start looking at people around, I noticed that the closest people to me as we were protecting the interests of Black people were Africans from the continent. I remember Fritz from Namibia, Santos and Grace from South Africa, Joseph Nee from Liberia, Stephen Gunthungo from Kenya, and Brother Kevin Mercer from the Virgin Islands. I just noticed that these were the people around. And so the closest people that I had in my network were African. And I think if we understood that we have more in common than we have in conflict, folks would come together more. But both sides are misled. And so when people say the Ethiopians don't like us, but I've been very successful. I'm grateful. I'm glad. But when I go and I'm doing field work, Brother Antonio, I'm literally in the most remote places that anybody can ever imagine. It is hard to get to these places. I mean, these are the most remote of the remote areas. Sometimes it's so remote that you cannot get there when the roads, well, you can't even call it a road, when the trail is too muddy. These are not always roads. But when we're in these very remote areas, it's just us, me, my colleagues, for example, in Omo Valley in Ethiopia, Brother Andu Alam, it's just us. We don't have armed security we don't need that.
Brother Tim, let me throw this jab at you right quick. It's something I've been saying. So let me know any truth to that. There's a different mentality between a village Africa and a city African. Would you agree to that? About our connection and who we are and how they respect us?
I would say 51% of the time that's correct, because more and more, what I've noticed, more and more Africans in urban environments are being westernized. This is more and more. And then with the growth of social media, it's very bad because you have now TikTok controls people around the world. And the older people don't understand this. As a scholar and as a social analyst, I've had to study TikTok so that I understand the mentality. And it's amazing how people around the globe, and not just teenagers, we're talking about in the 20s, 30s, 40s, in some places 50s, they live by that. And the values are very low level. So I've now noticed dramatic changes that have taken place in different countries. I was so amazed to see women, for example, in Sudan when I first went in 2007, because I had spent so much time in Egypt and even in the Nubian part of Egypt. It's still not like Sudan. So when I first went to Sudan to do field work, I was so impressed by the women who, great character, natural. And within 5 years, I was shocked by what I would now consider to be clown level makeup with makeup caked on, outrageous eyebrows, all that kind of stuff. So the transformation was happening in these urban areas. Even in Ethiopia, you have people that embrace traditional Ethiopian values, which are beautiful, but the shift and change is happening. It's definitive and it's undeniable. So I always tell people what you say, Brother Antonio, is that be careful in urban areas. Like one of the sisters who went to Ghana, and now we have really close relations with traditional kings in Ghana and so forth. I told her, I said, look, you're going to have to work hard to be around and learn in the traditional environment, because they're going to show you dungeons and castles and slavery, and then get traumatized by that, as if that's the totality of the Black experience. It's not. So she did well to protect herself from all that and go to the traditional areas, as I had suggested. So yes, the urban environments are changing, and so the westernization of human values is progressing, and within that, one of the most devastating things happening is the spread like a cancer of modern Western feminism.
Yes. Well, we're going to continue the conversation about that. And I just want to point out before we make our transition into the online platform that the psychosis on both sides of the world is real. You know, you got sisters on the continent using bleaching creams because they want to, you know, they want to have a white or European look to them because they're ashamed of the melanin. They're ashamed of the darkness of their skin. You know, they've done quite a job on us, on the psyche of Africans and the psyche of African Americans. And I contend that African Heritage Month is important, just as important for them as it is for us, because we have to change this paradigm of victimhood. We have to celebrate the accomplishments and not just look at the ways that we've been negatively affected, but we also have to look at the things that we have done to make the world a better place for everybody, because that's what gets lost in this whole erasure of history. You erase the things that we did for your benefit. And, you know, now that we're talking about a wing of the White House being torn down, destroying the work that our brothers and sisters did back then, it's a crazy world that we're living in. But, you know, there are some that say we're living in the best of times in spite of the craziness that is taking place. For those of you who are with us on AM 1490 WERE, we are about to make our transition to YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So if you'd like to join us, if you're listening on the radio, you can go to The Journey with Antonio and listen to 360 Info Network and watch it there. You can also go to my YouTube channel. You can go to 360 Info Network on Facebook and see us there. So we would welcome you. You can also join us in the chat. If you have questions, you can put your questions in the chat, and then we can take those questions and you can be involved in our program. As always, we like to thank our partner in the studio at the controls, Brother Tone Harley. We had a few complications here because of technology, but we were able to get on. So we thank you for that. And as always, we thank you for listening. As always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your absolute best day, y'all. Peace.
Peace.
Peace, peace, peace.
12 o'clock noon. And I see Brother Antonio's got something healthy over there
Yeah,
drinking.
where we at? Brother
Okay.
Green drink.
I'm drinking Shilajit. I don't know what Brother Ampim has in his vessel, but we're all drinking healthy stuff today.
The lemon water.
Okay, lemon water.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I start today. I boil a cup of water and I put my my Celtic salt in there and then squeeze half a lemon into it and drink some warm water every day. It's a good practice. So, you know, I see you getting with the program. Few things that I want to carry over from the last part of the discussion that we've had. And I'm just thinking about what's taking place in higher education. You mentioned 20 years at Contra Costa and looking forward to not having to grade papers and assigning yourself 100% to your mission and your journey. And I'm looking back at Kent State University, which I identified as the birthplace of Black History Month in America, and just looking at the difference between curricula and education. You know, one of the things that's going on at Kent State University and some of the other colleges and universities here in the state of Ohio, because of legislation that has been passed by the state Senate and the state House of Representatives, is we're having a pushback against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then when you look at curricula, the programs or the courses that relate to us are not required, and they're not involved in the majors that students are coming to college for. So if they can't apply those credits towards their degree, they're not receiving any type of incentive other than, you know, they're willing to spend the money to learn their history. So as a result of that, we're not as involved in our education as we should be. And I say this as someone who minored in Pan-African Studies when I was at Kent State University, and as a result, have a much greater knowledge and awareness of our relationship to Africa. But here in America, Africa is demonized so much in so many different ways that people don't even want to celebrate, or even they don't want to acknowledge their connection to Africa. They see it as something that they would be ashamed of, just like those sisters that are putting the bleaching cream on their faces. They're ashamed of who they are. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they don't know who they are. And the reason that they don't know who they are is because they don't have any idea or understanding of history, which has been kept away from them systematically.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, Professor, how we can go about perhaps getting people to embrace that African heritage and understand that the most important thing that they can do in life is know who they are. So as Brother Antonio says, so you can know what you are supposed to be doing.
Yes, sir. Well, you know, I appreciate that. Self-knowledge is the basis of true knowledge. To know yourself is the basis of really knowing. And so people have been taught to hate themselves by just the omission of information. Sometimes we say, well, they just lie all. It's not just all lies. It's much more sophisticated than that. There's a whole category of misrepresentation. So yeah, there's outright fabrications and lies, but there's also information emphasis, to just emphasize something over and over again, that, you know, white folks have made some kind of unique contribution to humanity, such as the Greeks, for example, creating democracy. And people go with that, they roll with that when that makes no sense, and it didn't happen. Democracy is a government of the people, for the people, by the people, but it comes from two words. Demos means people, and krasi means to rule. So it's the rule of the people. And so a democracy has citizens. In Greece, 80 to 90% of the people were not citizens. They did not qualify to be a citizen. So democracy for who? For the few. And if people really examine the normal propaganda that we're given, we see that this is simply this is a bag of goods that ain't worth nothing, and has nothing to do with facts, because documentation beats conversation, and the conversation has been that Africans haven't done anything. So these people that want to change their appearance and avoid Africa by all costs, well, the one thing they should know is that they'll never get out of the race alive. That I ain't no African. Well, your genes disagree with you, because your genes choose before you do. And so the fact is that it's important for us to really know our historical contributions, and that's one thing I'm working on, and we've made progress, is to make sure that we recover from historical amnesia. And people, if people, they can only understand slavery, and that's the extent of it. So this has been systematically drilled in, and our work is to make sure that we can tear down this falsehood and nonsense. You know what? I was 20 and a half when I woke up from my historical coma and started to embrace Africa. My father introduced me to life-saving books at the time, books that had self-explanatory titles like Ethiopia and the Origin of Civilization, Ethiopia and the Missing Link to African History. I'm saying, what? Books like The African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. Books like Black Moses, the story of Marcus Garvey. I said, who? And these kind of amazing book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, book, Stolen Legacy. These are self-explanatory titles. And I left my father's apartment that day with an armful of books, and I've never been the same. I was upset that I didn't know anything about anything. I began to read, and I used to tell that story. But then a few years later, I said, wait a minute, there's something missing. Why was I so open? Because I've never had a negative view about Africa. I didn't know about Africa one way or another, but I grown up in a household that we had positive images of Black folks. So even though I didn't know anything about anything, I didn't have a negative view about Africa. So that's why I was so open to embrace Africa. Whereas, and when we would watch the ignorant box or the boob tube or TV, all the propaganda commercials and images promoting whiteness and the so-called beauty of white women, we would laugh at that. So we never took it seriously. So I now understand the positive conditioning that I and my brother had growing up. And so when I'm looking at folks who will do everything they can to escape the race, it's the environment that they grow up in.
Absolutely.
And absolutely. It's this kind of negative reinforcement that takes place. Now, with social media and online communication, sure, we can have a positive 360 info network. We can use YouTube to promote the positive, but we have tons of channels out there promoting the negative, and people are dying on this. Their whole identity, their values are based on that nonsense that takes place. And while that's taking place, we also want, we know one other thing, I hope I addressed that. One other thing I needed to add: why would professors and scholars, why would they be so bent and on separating Carter G. Woodson from Africa? Why would they absolutely have disdain for the correct interpretation of this month, upcoming month, as African Heritage Month? One thing that the average person would not know is that in almost, I say almost all cases, all of us who've been trained in academia in whatever in Africana studies, African American studies, some are still using Afro American studies, if you can believe it, but we are not taught, with rare exception, about African civilizations. I was trained just like the Afro-Saxon. I was trained in terms of only dealing with Black trauma after slavery. I know the evidence very well, but what I did is I took the tools and techniques that I learned from my professor, Dr. Rosin Terborg Penn. I took the tools and techniques of firsthand research methods, and I applied it not only to the Black experience in the U.S. after slavery, which we all are taught in, but I applied it to African civilizations. I broke free. I'm free. You know, and that's why I'm at Contra Costa College. This is the first full-time job I've ever had in my life because I was mentally unfit to work for somebody else. I've been free. You know,
I know what you mean.
I was completely unemployable. I'm only there because, and this is not an exaggeration, because two people harassed me to apply for the position and they wouldn't stop. And I just turned in an application. I didn't even think twice about it because I wasn't concerned about that. I was concerned about doing my work. This is not my occupation, it's my vocation, it's what I do in life. So the bottom line is that I've been fortunate to not only have a late mom and a father to give me the right direction and to be embraced by traditional African kings, chiefs, elders, and heroes, because they know that I'm not representing the college. I mean, the college doesn't stop me, but I don't give them credit like they're helping to fund. They're not funding, you know, they just stay out of my way. But, you know, but to be able to be embraced, I'm not representing the U.S. government, USAID, and these folks understand that I'm helping all of us recover our historical memory. And last summer, I would have to go back and check my notes, but there were, I would say 5, 6, maybe 7 chiefs that all said the same thing. I think that number is probably low, that they're inspired by my line of questioning about their historical life ways, that they're telling me about kingship and the organization and the organization of their life ways that go back into antiquity. And no one's ever asked that depth of questions before. And they showed them evidence and images of themselves in antiquity. And said that they have a renewed respect for their own culture and tradition. I'm talking about the most remote areas that are very difficult to get to, number one. And secondly, they're not going to receive you unless you come respected. You got to come a respected person, and we sit down with the most important people to discuss with them and to document the traditional life ways and to help them to document traditions that were at the root and forefront of high-level civilizations of the past. And they can recognize that I'm not coming with any agenda other than to set the record straight and to make sure we can understand African, not just uniqueness, but African greatness, and to be able to tell that story as we would reading any novel, because we have to look at our experience as a novel. You look at it from cover to cover, but that's the whole point, to be able to look at the root and origin so that we can understand the present. The present helps to illuminate the past, and the past gives us insight about the present. And unless one is out in the field, there's no way to know. I've learned some extraordinary things, and also to see how relaxed they are. That yes, they may have a problem with a neighboring group squabbles over land, farming land, and they may have armed brothers who are serious about protecting the area. We come in, the men are typically out on the border area. They might be out with the cows grazing. There's a lot of women in the village, some half dressed or not, because no one's looking at them as a sexual object. I come around, they've never met me before. They haven't, met all of us in my small crew, and no one's concerned, no one nervous whatsoever. They're not thinking that we're going to be mistreating anybody or have some ulterior motives. Not at all. It is nothing but welcomeness. This is why I can say that I've been able to be fortunate enough to have extended family members in various areas, in various countries, and very, very remote areas like the Omo Valley in Ethiopia. Last summer, we were in Gambela. I've gone to places in South Sudan, for example, and people have told me similar things, that no scholar, and not at all, but in some cases that no scholar has ever visited them before. And they're appreciative of that. And they're thinking more about protecting me and my mission more than I am sometimes. Let's go meet the elders. And I'm saying, what's the delay? Then I find out that we weren't going to meet the elders until they should secure a trained national defense member who's a Dinka guy. And I just say, hey, man, how you doing? I had no idea he was the special security for that day. And so I took a picture next to the brother just to
Really
see the contrast of how big the cat was. But this is how, and then Elder Abraham said, hey, look, your mission is special. We respect that. And so they don't take any chances, even when I'm not even thinking about it. I'm not naive. I grew up in the Fillmore district in San Francisco. You had to be tough. So I'm not naive. I've been to many places, but I'm not always thinking about security on the level that they are, because they want to make sure that the work and the mission is protected. And so I'm very thankful about this. But the people in the city are the ones that escape this. They're ashamed of it because, honestly, like in Ethiopia, what people may not know, the Ethiopian government, the Sudanese government, they're ashamed. They're ashamed of these folks who don't wear the Western attire. They don't go through all of that. They don't do Western things. They still practice their cultural life ways. And the folks who are educated, quote unquote, in these urban environments are ashamed, and they would like to remove these people somehow so that National Geographic or BBC won't come in and do some documentary on the remote African. So anyway,
you know what, Professor, I think part of it, and I'm sure this will resonate with my brother Antonio, the folks in the village are closer to nature. The folks in the city, because of those Western influences, they're more likely to buy something in a package. Someone in the village will go out and pull something off the tree and have a meal and get more nutrition. So I think part of it is the issue of food. It's the issue of folks wanting to do, quote unquote, what's hip. But what is hip is not always in your best interest. I want to acknowledge a few folks who are watching us online, aka Be in Alignment. And I don't know if you know who that is, but it's somebody who knows you, Professor Manu, because they are joining us all the way from the UK. African Thinker 86, and I believe that might be Myron Gaines. He wants to get your opinion of Arab.
Okay, yeah. So brother African Thinker is he's a brother who wants my opinion about Myron Gaines. Yes. So
okay.
Yeah, that's the Myron Gaines that trends on YouTube, maybe other platforms as well. And this is a guy that as far as I've seen, he masquerades as some manly man. That he's the definition and representation of manhood. Well, I can tell you one thing. My father is 80. He'll be 88, and if anybody sees my father, they can see that he is a natural man. and he doesn't go around beating his chest about being some manly man. He just is. And this is what I grew up seeing. And I can remember when we were small, my father said, I can't stand no punk. So my father just despised weakness. And so seeing manhood with my father growing up and then in the family in general, this is something that you don't go around and pronounce. This is something that you are about just because you are who you are. And I've seen real men intimidate fake men just by doing what they normally do and not even thinking about, well, why are people so intimidated? Because there's no false bravado. So this Myron, if this is the same guy, I'm almost sure it is running around. Anybody can be tough on social media when you are some keyboard gangster and talking about manhood. We need real men, and I can tell you that talking about manhood, yeah, that's him. I've talked to and have seen young men who've gone through manhood training. And I can tell you a lot of the cats in the US and in the West in general, they couldn't take it and they couldn't make it because these are real young men who are trained by men. Like, for example, I was among the Decenage group. The Decenage are in southern Ethiopia and northern Kenya. They're right on the border. And I was able to go when I first started to go to the remote areas of Ethiopia back around 2017. And the Decenage, they did the demi ceremony. The demi ceremony is a rites of passage ceremony for young girls. And so the guys were dancing. These guys are all tall. This is Ethiopia, but you would think that it's not Ethiopia because we don't see these Ethiopians in the U.S. This is what I call the other Ethiopia. But the Decenage, the men are performing their part of the ritual. The women are performing their part of the ritual. So afterwards, I was asking through the translator, what were all of the marks? We should not call it scarification or scars, but cultural markings on the body. He had many, several of them did, but I asked, and they just said casually that those marks were representation of all the people we've killed. So really, no big deal. And these guys, you know what makes so I was seeing manhood on a practical level, and what people should also know. Some of the listeners or viewers, you have heard the term Jegna.
Mm-hmm.
That's been trending for maybe the last 7 to 10 years. And the Association for National Association of Black Psychologists have been promoting it and so forth. And I continue to hear the word Jegna in our interview. So I asked my colleague, I said, brother, are you saying Jegna or is it them? Said, no, it's not me. They kept saying Jegna because a Jegna, that's a male hero. Mm-hmm. But a female hero is not a Jegna. A female hero is a Jegnit. Now, this is in the language of Amharic in Ethiopia. So you have Jegnit for women, and then as a group is Jegnosh. So for them, there's the spiritual leader, kings, chiefs, there's respected elders, but there's the hero. The hero is somebody, a Jegna, let's say the male. A Jegna is somebody who exhibits extraordinary courage to protect the people from a dangerous animal like a leopard, a lion, or a buffalo. Mm-hmm. And or a Jegna, someone who shows extraordinary valor and bravery on the battlefield. A Jegna is somebody who is a protector, a promoter, and a defender of the culture. Then people have the utmost respect for a Jegna. But these are men. These are real men, not the fake internet gangsters that are running around safe behind their screens talking about manhood. In traditional Africa, manhood is shown and earned. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when somebody gets the cultural markings, again, cultural markings are not scars. If you flinch like a punk, you will disown your entire family and village. When they're using a razor, yes, the razor for cultural markings across the forehead, or it depends on the group, the cheeks or the body, don't flinch, don't move. And the young men who are the young guys becoming men all know that. But a lot of the gangsters here, they could never go through any of that to really become a respected man. And I'm talking about men This is why these guys respect when I'm there, and we're there to do genuine work. I'm humble. I'm not there to teach. I'm there to learn. And at the end of all of this, then I might show them images and pictures to get their opinion. So now I'm showing them things that they hadn't heard before, but I'm not there to teach like some arrogant ass American. And they can tell that I'm asking questions about manhood, about womanhood, and now I understand on a whole nother level what real men are about and how men are trained in traditional settings. I had saw it, just with my father, but to see the systematic cultivation of men has been very special in my experience. So this guy and others talking all that online, that don't mean nothing.
Yeah. Well, I would also like to say that despite all the negativity that we get from social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, there's a lot of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that is being,
Circulated.
yeah, you can tune in and learn history that you didn't get in the book. And I think too, because we have access to tools, and I'm going to say that artificial intelligence is one of those tools. We can create content that puts us in a victor status rather than the victim status. We can create content that changes the narrative, that shows what we are capable of, but also shows what we're doing. One of the real important things about what we do with this platform is we're able to create awareness about positive things that are happening in our community. When you turn on the news, you typically don't see that. You typically see crime and negativity. Everybody's walking around on eggshells because a blizzard is going to come. you know they got everybody worried and concerned. What if the power goes out? And so they do whatever they can to keep us in a certain lower vibrational state. But we have to understand that we're in a position to manage that and to operate at a higher frequency so that we're not affected by the negativity that they give us day in and day out. You don't have to watch the 11 o'clock news before you go to bed and take into your subconscious mind that somebody got
Bad
shot
out here.
on the block that's 1 block away from you. So you laying in the bed thinking, well, what if a bullet fly through my... They do all this to manipulate our mentalities when it is us that should be in control of those mentalities. And part of that is what you do in terms of shining the light on situations, asking questions about history and practices and culture that give people around the world an opportunity to know knowledge, to know things that edify them, to know that they are part of the great people that live on this planet that have done so much for civilization. We can look at Tony Browder's book. We can look at Destruction of Black Civilization. We can look at all these things that we have done to remember. And that's what it's really all about. It's about us remembering who we are and fighting against those efforts to remove our memory, to erase our memory, and to give us whatever programming they want to give us so that they can control our behavior. Antonio?
That is the key. What and what I wanted to say too, I'm going back a little bit to what Brother Ampim was talking about. He's seen the change after the last 5 years, and I immediately went to a biblical scripture and talking about Revelation, the great whore that caused many to fornicate with them, going to and fro, seeking who he can devour. And that's what is going on. And that's the pros and the cons of the media. I think these type of platforms is a double-edged sword, meaning that you can get that particular information out there, and I think it's going to be to his detriment, because these type of platforms have made the planet much smaller. And some of those places in the remote areas, they're getting some information like this through the TikTok and through this and through that. That's the good part of it. You know what I mean? But the bad part of it, they could take on some of those ugly ways, or those ways that take you out of your cultural status and cultural consciousness. But what I want to run by you, Brother Pim, is in my research and my understanding, and I have to take this from the substance abuse arena, as far as our people is concerned. I think we hit ourselves some barriers if we don't find a way of unlocking this. In the substance abuse arena, it says what? Before healing can take place, you first got to recognize that there's a problem. And I think many of us go around in this society not really realizing the depths of the problem, and we can't fix this particular thing if we going around complacent and not really understanding to the lengths and the great lengths that someone intentionally did put these particular barriers and psychosis and psychological barriers in front of us. So I don't think enough effort is put in there and actually showing people the game that, let me put it in street terms, the games that have been played on your mind, in your manhood, that keep you in the particular position that you are in right now. We say something, we know about the TV, but somebody needs, that I'm sure some works out there, but we need to get it out to our people more about the intentionality of the control, how they set up the control, how you set up in your schools, what they got you sitting in rows, that's rows and stuff like that. That's a German philosophy that that they brought from Germany. Sit them in rows, do this, and how all these control mechanisms are being placed in front of you through the media and this, that, and other. So until that bell rings in your mind of saying, I'm being played, this is all a game. Now they may be more open to be fed some other type of information to get them to thinking in another way.
Okay. Brother Ampim, you are working on a documentary right now. It has a relationship to Kush, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to bring that to our attention.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I coined the term Kushology, which is a study of ancient and modern Kush. And I coined the term Kushology some years ago to really define and explain the field work and the study that I've been doing for quite some time. Kush is the oldest of the classical African civilizations. Kush came first, then Nubia, and then Kemet. And so not only is that important to know about the antiquity of Kush, which the Greeks called Ethiopia. Ethiopia is not an African word, it's a Greek word. And but Kush is the oldest name, and the heartland of Kush, where the kings where the kings ruled from, was in current day Sudan. But Kush was in the entire region, much wider than that: Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Egypt, and across the Red Sea into Yemen and Saudi Arabia. But we don't know very much about Kush. Earlier scholars wrote about Kush, such as Drusilla Dungy Houston in her book, The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire. John Jackson wrote about Kush, Ethiopia, and the origin of civilization. And the great William Leo Hansberry discussed this great civilization. Chancellor Williams, in his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, has a very important map. He called it the Ethiopian Empire, but he's referring to Kush. But outside of that early work, there hasn't been any systematic field work to know Kush on the next level. So what scholars today will say is that the people in the Nile Valley, south of Egypt, they just call them Nilotics. That ain't saying nothing. That means that they're just along the Nile, or they're calling Southerners. That ain't saying nothing. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of groups. So in spending so much time in the area, I recognize that Kush is a mystery. The people in South Sudan, they use the name Kush, but they like Kush Airlines, Kush Bank. But in South Sudan, the way they use the word Kush, They'll say if a woman didn't know she was pregnant for, let's say, for 60 days, she didn't know she was pregnant, and she then finds out that she's indeed pregnant, they would say that's an example of Kush because she didn't know. So Kush is a metaphor to not know something. So when I'm in the area telling people about Kush, asking them about Kush and ancient Kushites, people know that they speak a Cushitic language. I'm showing them cultural practices from Kush that they continue today, but there hasn't been documentation of this. So the documentary is a first in a series, and so I've been in the field learning, meeting with important people, doing interviews. But this past summer, I hired a film crew and we went to Gambela, Ethiopia. This is the southern part of Ethiopia. This is the other Ethiopia where they don't look like the Ethiopians that we're familiar with here in the US. These are Ethiopians that are linked culturally, genetically, linguistically to people in South Sudan, Kenya, and Uganda. And so the documentary is on the first part, the Kushite groups in Gambela. Gambela is an area in the deep southern area where you have these unique or these groups like the Anahuac, the Majang, the Opal, the Como, and the Nuer. So there's five main groups. So the documentary is on the Kushite groups in Gambela. We have about 55, a little bit more than that, 55 hours of video footage, and the documentary will be coming out this year, and it will be a groundbreaking work on Kush, and the goal of the documentary, and this is the first in the series, is to be able to link the modern practices of the groups that are in the former area of Kush to antiquity, because there's a long string from the ancient Kushites, we're at the apex of advanced civilization, to the modern groups, and nobody has done the work in this area to really give the kind of insight about Kush that's needed and necessary. So when people see Kushites, for example, in antiquity, because of George Reisner, one of the great propagandists in the early 20th century, he had warped racial beliefs. And George Reisner from Boston University and the Boston Museum, I'm sorry, from Harvard and from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, George Reisner was sick. He went to Egypt and Sudan looking for a white queen and couldn't find one. He also, when he saw evidence from the black skin, truly black skinned Kushites, he was disturbed by that because his assumption is that Africans hadn't done anything. So when people see evidence of Kush, they would say, well, those must be Nubians. No, has nothing to do with Nubia. Nubia does not extend that far south, and these are not Nubians. And like I said earlier, the cultural markings, that's why now I can tell one group from another from the cultural markings and the hairstyle of the women. You can see from the braided hair what group they represent. So to be able to give this kind of specific insight is very important, to be able to know the cultural life ways of one group or another, and to distinguish them. Because like when if people go to my YouTube channel, Professor ManuAmpim.com, you can see some of this, but I've gone to areas where people are systematically misrepresenting evidence because they don't know, like the Louvre in Paris. They have a panel relief of different groups of men. One group are Africans, and the Louvre so-called experts, some of the best Egyptologists and archaeologists in the world, they label these men on this relief in the Louvre Museum in Paris as Nubian. Really? There's no way that these men are Nubian because of the cultural markings. So I know who they are. I know that they're Nuer because of the cultural markings. And so, but they're labeling them as Nubian. So the documentary will show the significance of Kush, the antiquity of Kush, and to show that not only was Kush at the fountainhead of advanced civilization, but there's Kushite groups today that still are practicing Cushitic life ways in remote areas, and they still speak a Cushitic language. And so the documentary is in the works. It's a huge project. If people go to advancingtheresearch.org, we have a link of how people can support the project, because it's a major project and there's major money involved. But regardless of the cost, it's going to be produced this year.
Okay. Um, the fact that you're a historian and you have an awareness of civilization on that side of the world compels me to ask this question, because I do research. I've gone to Chat GPT and I've asked questions and I've gotten certain answers. But you talk about Kush being the oldest of the classical civilizations, and you talked about an area that it encompassed. And I think in what you described was the place that we've kind of referred to now as Palestine. Um, when I asked Chat GPT about Jesus being a black man, it said he was a Palestinian. And I'm thinking, well, Palestine didn't exist at that time, nor did the Middle East. So how could you describe this man as a Palestinian? When you talk about that oldest civilization, and I'm thinking that that's that area of the world, then the people there, the people of the Bible, were Africans. It would lead me to believe that they were black people and not some Arab
Olive.
construct or anything other than a black man. So I'm asking you, Professor Historian, what's your thought about if Jesus existed, or Yeshua as he was known then, based on language? What is your thought about the possibility that he was an African, he was a black man, and he's not characterized as this Middle Eastern Palestinian type person?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. If we assume that the biblical text is authentic, and these are different books, different letters that were compiled at different times, and a lot of the books in the Bible were taken out. They were not the lost books of the Bible; they were just taken out and omitted in order to tell a story, a political story, and a particular, like the books of infancy, tell a totally different story about Jesus in his earlier years, and he had problems. He accidentally killed somebody, so he and his family were not very well liked. So there's books of infancy, there's other, gospel according to Joseph, and many other things. These are legitimate books that have been taken out. But if we assume that the books of the Bible are legitimate, then we can look at, why not take the text for what it says. In Daniel, it says that his skin's like it was bronze, like burned in an oven, and that's somebody very dark, and hair like lamb's wool. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the curly, helical, beautiful structure of the Africoid hair. So the biblical description indicates an African, no question whatsoever. So it's pretty difficult for someone to get around that. But in history, one of the key lessons and key things that have to be taught is historical context. Everything has to be put in historical context. There are two elements or two aspects of historical context, and if they're not, if they're not presented, then you know you have somebody who is an amateur and doesn't understand how historical arguments work. So the two elements of historical context are when and where, or time and place. These are questions that always have to be answered. So all this back in the day, that don't mean anything to a professor. What do you mean back in the day? Whose day? What day?
Mm-hmm.
But back in the day means I can say any damn thing because I'm not specific. Well, back in Africa, no, there ain't no back in. We're gonna stop right here. You got millions of square miles and over tens of thousands of years. So no, we're gonna be very specific. Otherwise, why am I wasting my time talking to you about back in the day? We ain't doing none of that. So when and where? So the Arab type, but by Arab we mean someone, literally the origins of that are desert dweller. These are people that originate in desert environments, so they're nomadic. So there's a nomadic origin, and they sweep across Africa in the 7th century of the Common Era. This is long after long after the biblical days for sure, and long after the other civilizations in Kemet and Nubia and going back to Kush. So these people occupy Egypt today and this area, even Palestine, because before that you have Africans from these civilizations that certainly had root and influence and occupy and residence in these areas before these other folks came around, which is very clear. So when people are seeing current day Arabs and others, they've come along in the 7th century of the Common Era, which is hundreds and in some cases thousands of years later. So they could not have been in any way associated with
Anything biblical.
Jesus or with the civilization. And I was asking somebody today, I'm trying to think, it was probably, it was a social media platform. It was actually YouTube. Somebody had sent some link to a ridiculous nonsensical statement someone made that there weren't any civilizations in Africa outside of Egypt, something really ridiculous. And which is crazy. But the bottom line is that if people simply go by the evidence, then there's nothing to discuss because the evidence is very quite clear that the point I was making is that in answering one of the questions online is that people should recognize that the current population in Egypt, for example, they are officially considered Caucasoid. That is the official identification. And not only that, but as I said, the Arab, the Arab, I don't have any issue with Arabs, but in terms of the historical record, well, I have issues with those that are destroying African people and that. But in general, if they're cool with us, there's no issue. So like Palestinians, there's no issue, but they're not the original people in the area. And the fact is that they don't sweep through the area until much, much later.
That's right.
So we can't be confused that people who came from Turkey and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia much, much later are somehow the original group of people. They're not. We can see that from the record. So if someone's not putting things in historical context, so when and where, and looking at that region and other regions in a chronological manner, then it's easy to leap through history like some superhero and skip all the things that they want to avoid in order to get to a modern conclusion that makes no sense. So we can't just leap through history with wild conclusions because documentation beats conversation. It's very important that we go through the view of every region, every area in a chronological manner. In other words, we put it in a proper time sequence rather than leaping into the modern era and thinking because it's one way today, it must have somehow always been that way when there's no evidence to support these kind of delusional positions.
There is a biblical story about Noah. Noah had 4 sons, and then those sons birthed nations. And one of the nations that was birthed through the lineage of Noah was Cush. What is the relationship between Cush, as you've described it, and this person, this biblical person identified as Cush?
Okay, so Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and
Japheth.
And according to biblical scholars, and this is wild, but they have to say this because it's supposedly nobody else in the world. So Ham is supposed to be the ancestor and the great progenitor of all of the black people. And then Japheth's supposed to be these are brothers, the ancestor of all white people. And then Shem is supposed to be the ancestor of all of the mixed groups. And so so we got Ham, and then from Ham, he has 4 sons, and the first of them is Cush. So even in the biblical record, they're indicating that from Noah to Ham, and then Cush, and so you got Cush. There's Cush. There's Cush. There's Mizraim or Egypt, and then also who am I blocking? And then there's Punt, and then there is none other than the area that we now call Palestine, but the biblical text calls it. Well, I'm drawing a blank here. You got but there.
Canaan.
Exactly. Canaan. Yeah, sorry. So Canaan. So Cush has the 4 sons, Canaan. Right, and then you got Mizraim, Put, and Cush, but Cush is the first one. But Canaan is that area. According to the biblical record, Cush is giving Ham is giving birth to Cush. Cush is giving birth to Canaan. So if we go by the biblical record, which people typically do and embrace, so how could, even by that standard, how could they somehow erase even the biblical evidence? And one thing people should also know is that there's publications like biblical archaeology, and there's a couple of them. That's one magazine where they take the stories from the Bible and go into these particular areas that they can identify that the biblical text is referring to, and do field work, do archaeological work to see if the story is correct or not. Because these stories have an influence. But if we just go through and by the way, this is from Genesis chapter 10. And in chapter 10 is, we would refer to it as the table of nations, how the nations came about. And so Ham is in the line of blackness.
Mhm.
Yeah, coming directly from Noah. And this is the position of biblical scholars. So it's very difficult to overcome that in order to try to make it seem as though current people are somehow can trace back to history, when no, people migrate all of the time, and populations change all the time, as has been the case here in the U.S.
So just to continue the connection, can you talk about the difference between the Bible as we see it through European eyes and the Ethiopian Bible?
Yeah, the Ethiopian Bible has more books. There's in some cases 81 or 88 books. And so the Ethiopian Bible, and one thing I know about Ethiopian or the orthodoxy among the Ethiopians, there's similarities, yes, but there's some differences too. The Ethiopians are very sincere about their embracing of religious and spiritual traditions. Like if anybody saw, like on the 19th, a few days ago, there was Timkat, very important ceremony there. And then the Ethiopian Christmas was January 7th. And you'll see literally millions of people in various locations because they're very serious about the holidays and the Orthodox tradition. Anybody can go online, just look up Ethiopian Christmas from a couple of weeks ago. You will see, look at Timkat, Timkat, and you can see these huge ceremonies in various locations. But the Ethiopians, their approach, their biblical text is different. But one thing one sees about the biblical tradition among the Ethiopians, the priest, they in the rituals and ceremonies, they don't use just the national language of Amharic. They use Ge'ez, which is an older language. So in the church, they actually are still speaking Ge'ez. Ge'ez is a gateway for us to know about the Aksumite kingdom and the whole area of ancient Kush. And I'm glad to know that in the universities like Addis Ababa University, the capital city, and other places, they now are teaching Ge'ez, so that more people are now learning Ge'ez, which is the root of Amharic, the national language. And so it's not just the religious leaders, but scholars and students are now learning that language, and it's very important. But these people are very serious. You can be driving in different areas, and you'll see a huge amount of people at a funeral, for example, which I've seen on multiple occasions. Their approach and their view is completely different than how we would approach things here. I mean, these people are fervent. They are, and so while they are, they embrace this religious tradition so hard, it maintains these practices from one generation to the next to the next. So this is very important to know. Now, one thing that people might see, however, in the Orthodox Church is these images that were introduced around the 16th century or so, the Byzantine images of white people, of white folks. And so that's one problem that you would find in the Ethiopian churches and monasteries, all these white images. But if you look closely, not in every case, but in some cases, you have the white images that have been painted over the original Ethiopian images, where they have the afro and the darker skin. You can see it beneath the more modern paint. And in some cases, it's gone all together. But that's the original that's been blotted out. And unfortunately, if someone goes to Ethiopia, and I'll be frank about this, if they don't go on my tour, they will get the standard tour, and they will be, they'll be bombarded and flooded with all these white images because the tours are set up where you go to one church after another. And when I went the first time to do, the field scouting, this is back around 2010, before I started leading tours, and I took the first group. We stayed 2 weeks, but with a weekend, they had enough. It was just too much. And the guy wanted to know what was happening. I said, look, man, you have to understand that we've had a Black Christian nationalist movement in the U.S. We've had a Black Power movement. We've had all these different important movements, and there's no way that Black folks can take any more of this. You all are African, but take a look at the images on the walls and the windows. So this is crazy. This does not represent traditional Ethiopia. And I remember one of the times, this is what, 2.5 years ago, one of my colleagues, he was translating for me. He said, Professor, you won't believe this. The guides and the priests are over there saying that what you were saying was stunning because they never thought about it before. When I was explaining to them why these images, it's enough. We've already proven that there's problems. We don't need to continue to see this. So they had never thought about the fact that people are now offended by this. We're Africans from the U.S. visiting an African country among African people, and you got the white guy. How did the white guy become God?
What's the hell? What? Okay, go ahead, Vince, because I got the button. I
got you. I just have to follow that up by asking, because you dropped a bomb on us and we didn't say anything, but you said that there is a mythology that Jesus actually killed a man and they had to I guess the question that I have in my mind is that in the Ethiopian Bible? And if not, where can we find this history that we have not been connected with?
Okay, that's easy. So, folks, all you have to do is go to there are 2 books of infancy on the early life of Jesus. 2 of them, they've been taken out because they don't tell the story of a savior, of a man, a savior born of an immaculate
virgin birth and all that.
Yeah, exactly. So the books of infancy, there now, you can find them if somebody has it, or you can order it, I'm sure, online, the lost books of the Bible. And so these are books that have been taken out for political reasons. And the books of infancy 1 and 2 describe Jesus when he was very young. He accidentally killed somebody when they were out playing, and so he and his family were marked from that point, not because he was the savior of the world, but because somebody was killed. And so so we should think about those lost, those missing years in Jesus' life. Or what was he doing? What was happening? The books of infancy help explain that.
Yeah.
Well, there are some accounts that he was in India, he was in China, he was all these different places. All we get is he was born in a manger, and then we fast forward 30 years and he's turning water into wine.
Well, you got to first get him at 12. We went on the road at 12. 12, that's when he disappeared. Yeah.
And they say, well, he spent time in Egypt and he learned from the Essenes and everything, but then there are all those missing years. So we don't get any kind of indication that Jesus had relationships with women, that he had children, that he lived the life that a man would live. I mean, they say in the quote unquote, and I'll just use this term, Jewish tradition, if you're a young man and you're not married and you don't have children, something's wrong. They looking at you sideways because you're not adhering to the tenets of that culture. So it just doesn't make sense that he would be 33 years old, never had a wife, never had children, never did the things that everybody would do back then.
Right, and that's why. So the 88 books in the Orthodox in the Ethiopian Bible, I have not read all of them, but I know that that's a lot more than the King James version, which is typically 66. So that's 22 extra books, and then not only that, as I said, all of the books that were there's a gospel according to Joseph, and there's other gospels that have been taken out. So I'm sure some of the viewers know about the Council of Nicaea in 325 of the Common Era. Well, this is a conference that was held because of the fact that the Roman government needed to make sure everybody in the Roman kingdom was under one mindset and under one authority. So they wanted to make sure that only one political story is told. Mm-hmm. So this is why the books of the Bible were edited, changed, and to create a story. And John G. Jackson is one of the writers that was fascinated with showing that even a lot of the biblical text is not even original. They've taken stories from different other traditions, the book of Amenemope and others from Kemet, the books of wise instruction, which are much older than what you see in the Songs of Solomon or the books of Proverbs. You can see literally line by line where the text would have been taken. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, Professor, no. Well, if Moses was the lawgiver, for example, and Acts 7:22 says Moses would learn in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. If that's so, he would have had to been trained in the entire tradition.
Absolutely.
So the Ten Commandments, if Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, he had to go up there with them because they were already in existence. And we see a lot of the biblical text is not new. And these are different versions put together. You can look at Genesis beginning at chapter 2, verse around 3, that these are different versions being merged together. So the Council of Nicaea and other such councils have to be looked at if people want to know where these books came from. I have an old family Bible from many years ago, and what I like about it is that the introduction is very thorough because it has in the introduction, all of the different versions of the Bible, and people were killed because their books were considered to be heretical, and that they were wrong and blasphemous, and people were burned and killed later to find out that those books were actually accurate. So there's a lot of material that have been edited and changed in order to tell a story. But the books of infancy blow up a lot of the presentation that has been made about Jesus and his status and stature. But people, should recognize this. And not only that, but even if we just take the Bible again as it is, there's a work called the Text of Terror. The Text of Terror, where you look at Old Testament text, and these people, these writers, these patriarchs, these men who are writing, they don't have the highest regard for women, but even more than that, these texts of terror, according to these writers, they justify killing off anybody that God deems to not be Christian. How the hell you go into some place and kill people and take their land? And so
that's godly, though.
Yeah, this is colonization and killing, and people will defend themselves. But it's okay to go into Sodom and Gomorrah and other places and just kill people. Really? Well, what are you doing? You're perfect, and you can claim that you represent God all you want. But the people, like I remember the great Kwame Ture, and we would bring him in. He would say, "Well, you're not God," and the Palestinians will put a bullet to you if you think you're going to come in and quoting some scriptures as if you have the right and the responsibility to use the text and come in and take land and kill people. So God does that. So there's a lot of problems when we really look at this and all the fighting and killing that goes on in the name of God. But I can say this: the Ethiopians are very serious and sincere about the embracing, but it's the images that have been introduced that many of them, and you can see, anybody can go online, social media, when people have their posts, look what image they're using. If they use a biblical image, it's usually a white Jesus and a white Mary. Really? And I've told a few of them, I said, "Are you kidding?" So what's the justification for? And they've never thought about it before. So they represent a lot of greatness. I love the Ethiopian culture and people, but there are contradictions there as there is in any other location.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well, there's a contradiction with the Ten Commandments, because if you go by Asara Set and Heru and the prototype that was established there were 42. So you left out 32 of those confessions of freedom from sin, and you flipped them around, and then you made that the central part of your religion. It's really amazing. Antonio, go ahead.
Yeah, here's the thing, and kind of summing things up. I just want to get to the psychic of this a little bit. You know, of us, all these conversations, these books and things like that, people writing, and you know, they can't go as far as to say they was, you know, if they true to their scholarship, you know, Jesus was a white Anglo-Saxon. They can't go that far, but they want to give them an olive color and get them close as they possibly could in doing that. So I'm saying this again, and when I made the statement earlier, you know, you got to recognize the problem before healing can take place. So why the cover up? Why all the lies? You know, I mean, that's what our people need to understand, because I don't think they're getting a clear view of what's the backdrop behind the scene. Why is they doing this? You know, claiming this stuff and talking about Israel, talking about Palestine, the Arabs and all the rest of it, the Council of Nicaea. They want to rewrite everything. They stole the stuff from the Gnostics and the Coptics and, you know, the Catholics and that whole line. Why is this just about a people trying to include themselves into something that they wasn't there? Why?
I want to answer your question, Lynn, and I'm going to do it real succinctly. The reason that they don't want you to know is because they don't want you to look into the mirror and see Jesus. That's why. They don't want you to see Jesus when you look in the mirror. That's the whole thing.
So is it all the fear of who you are and what you are, because they know the hybrid substandard, and they know, I mean, this the control thing. I just want somebody else to say, I got my opinion of it, but you know, I just want this, you know, I mean, that's a lot of effort. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of energy. A lot of people been slaughtered, killed, starved to death, and did all kind of things through history. You know, you got people claiming Israel that know they ain't nothing but Eastern Europeans and want to say they the sacred, they the holy. What's up, man? What's the psychosis and what is going on?
Yeah, you know, the last word, Brother Manu.
Well, you know, the thing is that we clearly suffer collectively from historical amnesia, and they're given the condition and situation and the quagmire that Black people are in. There's either one or two things. Either it's always been that way, and that we've never done anything worthwhile, that we've always been second-class citizens and worthy slaves that are dependent on somebody else for food, shelter, clothing, education, transportation, and health care. Either it's always been that way and it's the same old, that's the natural order, or we lost our way and that we had a way and we lost our way. And clearly that's the situation for us. So we had a way and we lost our way. So we don't know, we don't remember our way, which is the way, the tradition, the culture, the high-level contributions that have sustained the world with advanced development, with the domestication of plants. So for farming, the domestication of animals, the introduction of high-level medical techniques and introducing math at an extraordinary level, and chemistry from Kemet, or so-called ancient Egypt, but from Kemet we get alchemy and then eventually chemistry. We look at the first writing in the history of the world, the high-level social organization and high status of women. There's so many contributions that Africans have made, and we've lost our way. We've lost our knowledge of our traditional life ways. And so we've been separated from it. This is why it's so outrageous and criminal that people can embrace February and not even understand that the man who's the reason for the season, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, embraced African tradition, African culture, African history. He's learning, he's a pioneer, but he's consistently pointing the way and writing about it. Even if all of his writings are not in depth, he's writing about it. So it's to make sure that the current order stays the way it is, by us thinking that there's something normal and natural about our current status, as opposed to having a great way that we've lost the knowledge of. It's like putting somebody in a forest with no signs anywhere, no compass, no GPS system, and now tell them find your way out of it. And this is where we are. We're confused, lost, and not understanding that there's no escape. There's no way other than our way, which is the way, in which other people steal, they lie about because of the great contributions to have us to stand up and be human and make these unique contributions. So they steal our stuff, and then have too many of us completely unaware of what we've given to the world. So why? Because people want to keep things the way they are, and to keep the status quo, and that can only be done if we're ignorant of it, and then those that know about it and embrace it, to make sure that we don't have a big enough voice, that we don't have a big enough influence. And then some of these people, I saw something, a lady, she's not of African descent, this is a professor, she has a YouTube channel, and she's just presenting history. I saw the last episode a few days ago. She said that there were men in her DMs telling her to cease and desist, otherwise we will kill you and your family. The woman is just talking about general history. She's a Latina.
Wow.
And and guess what? She said, you know what? I can't do this. I can't do this and put my family at a risk. So she said, hey, you know what? I got to keep it small, keep it private. Come to me with Patreon, but I can't publish on YouTube anymore because these threats might be real. And that's what people don't understand, is that when you start to have influence on a level that the traducer or the traditional opponent doesn't like, they're going to come after you. And that's why, even if you do know, you have to deal with those who are willing to do something about it, physically, or at least the threat of it. And I even know a Sudanese colleague that was threatened to stop protesting against the killing of Africans in Sudan. Otherwise, we will come after you and your children in DC. And she backed off. So that's what we're dealing with, even if we do know. But guess what? As I said earlier, this is not my vocation, my occupation. It's my vocation, what I do. And in other words, it's my incarnation objective. It's what I do in life. So if somebody wants to act crazy and talk crazy, then rise up, because real men, we don't know fear.
Yes. Well, you are the evidence of someone knowing who they are and what they're supposed to be doing. You dropped some nuggets on us today, brother. I got to get that lost book of the Bible, because
Book of infancy.
yeah, I'm telling you, there's some things that have been left out that we need to know. Before we get out of here, if you want to talk about anything that you have coming up, I know I posted that you do tours to Africa. So if you've got anything coming up, please let us know.
Well, I appreciate it. I typically do tours to Ethiopia and Kemet every year. This year, I'm taking a break because I'm working on finishing the documentary on the Gambella Kushite groups in Gambella. So people can go to advancingtheresearch.org for that information. And also, I want to mention my book, A History of African Civilizations. It's what I teach in the classroom, but why make it available to students and also not make it available to the public? So A History of African Civilizations, which is a survey of unique African contributions to humanity. One thing I would like to say in closing on that, civilization is the small stature people who taught us what it meant to be human, to live in complete harmony with their environment. The Ife, the Mbuti, the San, the Khoi. These are the small stature people, 4'8", 4'10". They taught us what civilization is about. But so the book deals with that. initially, but the rest of the book deals with the advanced civilizations, which is a big difference from civilization and advanced civilizations like Kush, Nubian, Kemet, where they were building for eternity. So I would advise the people, and you can get on my email list if you want to stay informed. Manu Ampim at Gmail. So those are the projects. Also, there's some book projects I'm working on as well, and one will be a major project which I'll announce later. But one book that I'm going to be discussing on an upcoming podcast. One of the brothers from the UK, he may know about Thrill Black. If you go to the Thrill Black channel, I'm going to be live on February the 13th. Thrill Black, Thrill Black. That's 9 p.m. UK time, and that is 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's going to be on the 13th to talk about some of my ongoing field work. So I appreciate you, brothers, for being consistently consistent over a consistent period of time, and it takes one to know one.
Yes. Well, I thank my brother Antonio for introducing you to Cleveland and the rest of the world, and I'm glad that we're able to connect and bring this great knowledge that you are providing for us. So thanks for joining us on 360 Info Network. Anything that you'd like to add before we conclude, brother Antonio?
Yeah, just one thing, and I want to ask the ancestors to forgive us, for not mentioning it earlier. But we lost one of our great ones. I like to dedicate this particular episode of our show to him, and then let the rest of our listeners know who may not know that the great Dr. Charles Finch III has made his transition. I love the brother. The brother was a heavy hitter as far as this knowledge is concerned, and we lost a great one. So send a prayer up to our good brother. He's now in the spiritual realm, and being able to take some of our issues or problems to the great spirit, because he's in the spiritual realm right now. So again, Dr. Charles Finch III, go get his books. He just maybe a couple years ago he just released that last book of his, maybe a year or so ago. Yes. A couple years ago. So get his books, look up some of his YouTube videos as well. Dr. Charles Finch III.
All right. Thank you for that, Dr. Charles S. Finch III. And he's got a real thick book sitting on my bookshelf. Maybe I need to crack that bad boy open now. But, the beauty of that is that they leave evidence behind and they continue to exist in our memories. And that's typically or virtually the definition of history. As long as we continue to say their names, as long as we continue to read their books, and as long as we continue to make them part of who we are, they continue to exist. Thank you for joining us, Brother Manu.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. And as always, don't forget, we got a meditation program that's going to happen at Larchmere Arts today. I'm going to be leaving to get there in a few moments. But today at 4 o'clock, you can come through and learn about meditation. We talk about it on the show all the time, but this is one of the ways that you can empower yourself. This is one of the ways that you can manifest the things that are important to you. And this is one of the ways that you can enjoy success in life. So it's a powerful tool, and you can learn all about it if you come to our session in just a few hours. I just want to again acknowledge AKA Be in Alignment. Whomever you are, we appreciate you. And everyone who jumped in the chat with us today, I just want to shout out my friend Kavana Faith Walker, who is watching from Alabama. And I'd also like to shout out my friend Tammy Herring down there in Massillon, Ohio. Thanks for joining us. And as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. Make today your absolute best day. Peace, everyone.
Peace, peace, peace.